Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us. Today is Tuesday, September 14th, and you're watching Regent Park Weekly News, bringing you the latest local news and events around Regent Park and Toronto. My name is Fred Alvarado and my co-host,
Murphy Brown. As hundreds of Regent Park resident students went back to in-person classes at Nelson Mandela Park Public School last Thursday, parents felt excitement and a mix of emotions about returning to school amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Our community journalist, Fred Alvarado, has an overview report on what happened last week as all in-person classes and activities resumed on September 9th.
The last time Regent Park kids attended in-person classes at Nelson Mandela Park Public School was well over 500 days ago. Parents say they were excited but nervous as they dropped their children off to school on Thursday. Regent Park residents Susie and Cody were happy to pick up their kids after the first day back to school under special health measures implemented by the Toronto District School Board.
I feel excited because we have been locked home for 1.5 years and oh my God. Oh, it was terrible. I couldn't wait to just bust out. Never interacted with any kid for 1.5 years. Oh my God. So now he gets to socialize with children.
I'm Cody, and this is Nathan.
feel good? How was your first day at school?
Was good.
Yeah,
Good.
it's nice to be back, you know? Good to be back playing with all the kids on the equipment again, in the field. And online school was okay, but I think that it's better to be hands-on.
The Ministry of Education has sent guidelines to schools in a bid to slow the spread of the virus, which include requirements that staff and students self-screen for COVID-19 each day and wear masks indoors. It will be the third school year affected by the pandemic, though this year the province's science experts are calling for schools to stay open in all but the most catastrophic circumstances. Vaccination against the virus isn't currently mandatory for students or school staff in Ontario. The province is requiring unvaccinated staff to regularly get tested for COVID-19, but healthcare groups and political opponents have called for the shots to be made mandatory.
The Ministry of Education sent a memo to all school boards on Monday with what is expected for school staff who are unvaccinated. Staff must be tested twice weekly, which must be done at home, and no more than 48 hours before coming to work. The memo says there should be at least 3 days between tests. They also need to input their test results into an app. All school boards are expected to have a vaccination policy in place by September 27.
Ontario health officials are reporting just under 600 new COVID-19 cases on Tuesday, as well as 7 more deaths due to the disease. Most of the new cases were found in parts of the Greater Toronto area. Officials reported 160 new cases in Toronto, 67 new cases in Peel Region, 46 new cases in York Region, and 13 new cases in Durham Region. According to the province's epidemiology report, of the 577 new infections reported on Tuesday, 97 cases were identified in children under the age of 12. The province reports that 10.1 million people in Ontario have received both doses of a COVID-19 vaccine and are now considered fully vaccinated against the disease.
And now we go with Humaira Rahman for the events in Regent Park area.
Now we move to events in the Regent Park area that took place and will be happening between September 7th and September 19th. A virtual all-candidates meeting took place on Monday, September 13th for the federal elections. This event was broadcasted by Regent Park TV, and it was sponsored by Community Civic Engagement Collaborative, which is a nonpartisan grassroots collective of agencies and residents in the Regent Park, Moss Park, St. Jamestown, and Corktown. This organization is working to increase civic engagement in elections and beyond through community organizing. Now we present to you the highlights of last night's all-candidates meeting.
Racialized communities in particular don't own as much as other communities in our country, and specifically in Toronto Centre. I took that back to caucus, and part of our plan in Budget 2021, part of our election platform, contains a rent-to-own strategy.
Our renter benefit will provide up to $5,000 for renters who are seeing a difficult time making ends meet, because it's so much easier to keep you in the home that you're at. It's healthier for you, it's healthier for our communities, and it's better for everybody. And this isn't just a program that we're implementing in terms of just for the pandemic. We're actually interested in keeping this program permanently.
We have to get back to basics. We knew and know what we need to do. We just need the political will to do it. And those are things like purpose-built rental housing units, affordable housing units, co-op housing units, community supportive housing. Toronto Centre was actually a global model for how you build that kind of housing and create vibrant mixed income communities. We need a federal partner that's going to help us to get back to those roots. It's really about building those roots.
That's why Canada's recovery plan will make homes more affordable for owners as well as renters. We're not building enough homes and rental units to keep up with Canada's growing population, which is a big part of why homes are getting harder and harder for Canadians to afford. So as part of our plan, we will implement our plan to build 1 million homes in the next 3 years, and we're going to build more homes near publicly funded transit.
There's so much that's involved, but what it actually requires us to do is actually treat this as a national public health emergency, because this is an issue from here. It's an issue in Timmins. It's an issue in London, Ontario. It's an issue in the downtown Vancouver East Side. It's an issue in Montreal. There is no place across this country that is not being touched by the opioid crisis. So we must be confronting this at a national level.
We need to decriminalize to end the stigma. We need to create a national safe supply program of drugs of choice, so that people who are using know that what they're using is safe. And then we need wraparound services. We need community supportive housing, mental health care services, employment services.
We are addressing it as a government. A re-elected Liberal government is looking at health transfers in the neighborhood of $4.5 billion over 5 years, specifically for mental health to provinces and territories.
We want to see more action when it comes to the opioid crisis. I'm excited by Aaron O'Toole's plan to invest $325 million over the next 3 years to create 1,000 residential drug treatment beds and build 50 recovery community centers across this country.
I have fought for tuition fees to be lowered. I fought against the deregulation of tuition fees, and I have stood in support of international students. And I think that this discussion about post-secondary education must include a discussion about international students and the way that post-secondary education, post-secondary institutions in Canada are using them as pure investments. The deregulation of international students is actually harming people who are coming to this country to get an education, but they're coming here and paying tens and tens of thousands of dollars more than domestic students for the same equivalent education. So we must, this is absolutely essential that we have this discussion about the way that we treat international students and the way that these international students are actually subsidizing our domestic students because of the underfunding from the system. And I'll remind everybody that there was once upon a time when the federal government actually participated in the regular funding of post-secondary education in Canada. And we can definitely go back to that model. And it's something New Democrats will work to over the course of the next few years.
We have waived interest payments for students. A re-elected Liberal government would waive the interest payments completely. Right now, they are due to end. We would waive them completely. Also doubling student grants, which is really, really important. The Canada Summer Jobs Program.
Once we have all of the benefits of the Canada Recovery Plan in place, people will have more money to do the things like post-education. Thanks.
that we should join countries like Denmark and France and Germany and Finland and all the other wealthy economies that have free post-secondary education, free. And those that have debt that the federal government is holding, I mean, the federal government has become a loan shark now. They need to abolish that debt. They should forgive that debt. There's no reason they can't.
For me, it's about grassroots. It's about being a part of the community. It's about connecting with the community. It's about listening. It's about taking action. In the last 10 months as MP, we did that, and asking for a mandate to continue because there is lots more work to be done. We've heard the issues. We know the issues. Housing, mental health, youth, mentorship is huge for me. Reconciliation.
And there are so many ways in which the government isn't meeting your needs right now. Think about the lack of affordable housing. And I mean a safe place to call home. There should be a place for all of us to call home. There should be a safe place for your children to call home. There should be a safe place for our elders to call home, our Indigenous communities, people in parks. There should be safe spaces for all of us. We were not meeting the needs of our communities.
Toronto Centre needs a champion in Ottawa that is going to be its partner, helping to find the resources to support the community. It is doing all that it can. It just needs some help. You know, we need some help. And that is where your representative comes in. And we have been trying to demonstrate that in real time, you know, not outside of the election cycle, showing up to help with food drives, helping to get groceries for seniors, helping to get laptops for people who need them, helping to get people rehoused. That's what real help looks like. And then you combine that with the big issues: guaranteed livable income, universal pharmacare, universal post-secondary education, the things that you need for a life of dignity. And that is really a winning solution.
With the Conservatives, you get Canada's recovery plan to secure jobs, health, and Canada's economic future. We will secure jobs by recovering every one of the million jobs lost during the pandemic within 1 year. We will secure accountability by enacting new anti-corruption laws to clean up the mess in Ottawa. We will secure mental health through our Canada Mental Health Action Plan. And we will secure our country by creating a stockpile of essential products and building the capacity to manufacture vaccines at home.
Sunday in the Park's first edition of Emancipation Proclamation Festival in Regent Park took place on September 12th. This event celebrated diversity in Regent Park under the theme of reflecting on past to shape the future. Residents enjoyed 3 hours of 60s and 70s R&B funk and soul live music featuring R&B gospel artist Tina Jarvis and Snooki Tyne Soul Express Band. The Project Peace event was organized and sponsored by Regent Park Black Lives Matter Coalition, the Warner Social Enterprise for Social Justice in partnership with 51 Division.
We're always happy to come out for community events, and thanks to Joanne and all of her folks for putting this on. It's a right and appropriate event to celebrate.
Our next event is the Moss Park Community Benefits Coalition and Building Roots organized the Moss Park Tour event. This event was called Have You Heard About the Moss Park Subway Station? This event took place last Saturday, September 12th, right outside the Moss Park Market, which is located on 260 Queen Street East. There was food, community conversation, and a tour guide, including guided visits to Burton Street and the Queen East site.
And that's where the location of the station box will be. The subway will run on the park side. Now, so not under the streets, but under the park, because it's already owned by the city and it can be ripped up. So the subway is going to be built very deep underground, deeper than all of our existing infrastructure, including the existing subway. So it'll be going even deeper, right at the bedrock. So the lowest you can go. Built very deep underground, deeper than all of our existing infrastructure, including the existing subway. So it'll be going even deeper, right at the bedrock. So the lowest you can go. So likely all those trees are going to have to be removed. And half the park space is going to be a giant hole in the ground because it's going to be used as a staging site. So material will be coming in dirt will be coming out. Massive. We're talking huge bulldozers.
Condos coming into the neighborhood, and for a lot of us, the question is, what is that going to mean for people that live here, for the community that's been living here for a long time?
We want accountability. We want transparency. And what we want is we want the community to actually inspire what is developed. So we don't want developers to plan how a community was going to be built. We wanted the community to do so.
We also had the Cultural Bazaar organized by youth and grassroots of Regent Parks happening every Friday on the corner of Sumac, right across the Aquatic Center. This event starts at 4 p.m. and ends at 8 p.m. During this event, you can get your henna done by local henna artists in the community, enjoy live music, and shop locally to support dozens of artisans and designers. During this event, you can also shop jewelry, purchase cultural foods and desserts, or even just grab some ice cream to relax. Another event that will be taking place this week is led by the Social Development Plan of Regent Park. On September 21st, they will be having a stakeholders table, while on September 22nd, they will be having a visioning session. And our final event of this week is the Sunday in the Park. Sunday in the Park is hosting their 30th annual event that is set to take place on September 19th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. And that'll be all for events today. See you next week.
Federal party leaders met last Thursday night for their only English language debate. Clean drink water, treaty rights, systemic racism, unmarked graves, dismantling the Indian Act, and responding to the National Inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls were all issues covered as part of the Indigenous reconciliation topic of the debate.
I think if there's one thing that Canadians and Indigenous people can all agree upon, it is that this Indian Act system is not working for anybody. How would you dismantle this broken top-down system, and what would you replace it with that would ensure that Canada still is living up to its constitutional obligations to Indigenous people?
First of all, we are looking forward to dismantling the Indian Act. It is a commitment of ours, but it is not something that Ottawa gets to decide. And what replaces the Indian Act will vary from community to community as we live up to our obligations.
The way to go forward is to listen to leaders. And Mr. Trudeau ignored one that he had in his own cabinet, in Jody Wilson-Raybould. That was a huge lost opportunity. We've been speaking to people with how we can accelerate treaty resolution. There are some treaty negotiations, Ms. Ridgen, that have been going on, as you probably know, for decades. We need to solve it, and we need to work with Indigenous leaders. There's incredible Indigenous leaders in nonprofits, in the private sector, in industry, in academia. We need to use that governance capacity to finalize treaties and build partnerships. Absolutely. Because the best way forward is success for Indigenous peoples alongside their neighbors, alongside
Mr. Singh and then Mr. Trudeau. I'm coming to you, Mr. Trudeau.
I'll just jump in on this one point. I think absolutely the solution has to be Indigenous-led. And I think that's the starting point. And for a long time, we've seen that there's been a top-down approach that has to change. It has to be Indigenous people at the table. But I want to talk about the impacts, so just we understand how severe this is, how the Indian Act is creating injustice and perpetuating injustice. I spoke to Bee, who's a young woman, a young girl who lives in Niskandiga. And she told me in her own voice, she said, I'm a 12-year-old girl and I'm fighting for clean drinking water. How does that make any sense? Those words haunt me to this day. I think about what 12-year-olds do, and they certainly aren't fighting for clean drinking water. That is a legacy. That is the impact of the Indian Act.
I want to go back to what Mr. O'Toole has been saying, because he's very able at saying all the right things, but there are countless examples of him actually not living up to his words. We've seen him on a number of times during this campaign, but on Indigenous issues specifically, he says we need to listen to Indigenous peoples. Well, he proposed that he would raise the flags that are at half-mast for the kids in unmarked graves in residential schools. And he didn't talk to or listen to any Indigenous leaders when he made that decision. And that's something that is important and symbolic, but wouldn't cost a cent. How do we believe that he would be able to actually make the investment necessary?
Hold on. I'm going to give Ms. Paul and Mr. Blanchet a chance to jump in. We haven't heard from them yet. Time permitting, I'll come back to you, Mr. O'Toole.
And I really, again, want to
I asked Mr. Trudeau to move immediately.
Hold on, Ms. Paul.
I really just want to try to recenter our conversation on Indigenous peoples and what we are going to do to fulfill the many unfulfilled promises and commitments that have been made. And I would say, perhaps to pick up on what has been said, that it seems all too often that reconciliation is treated like a buffet. You can opt in for this, pick this plate, but not the other one. And that applies to what we've seen with Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals. You can't, on the one hand, say reconciliation and then go and not allow Mi'kmaq fishers to be able to have a decent, moderate living for all of these years. You can't call reconciliation and then take Indigenous peoples to court. But Mr. Singh, you also can't say reconciliation and then support the NDP government in putting pipelines through Indigenous territories, or support Line 5 after the Anishinaabe made it very clear that they did not support that project.
Ms. Paul, I'm going to allow Mr. Blanchette to get in. He's been signaling he wants to.
Yes.
I will come back to the two of you. Mr. Blanchette.
First Nations and Quebec have something in common. They are binded by a document they never signed. And any relationship between nations should be dealt with freely signed treaties or agreements or something. The Indian Act has to be replaced one nation at a time, if need be, by and with freely signed treaties and agreement. There's no other way. And if I may come back a few seconds on something else. Quebec wants religion out of the state affairs because religion never protected equality for women and never will.
The federal party leaders traded barbs between themselves and at points with the moderators during Thursday night's leaders' debate. And nearly a third of Canadians watching at home have no idea who won, according to a Vote Compass question of the day. This civic engagement tool, which is running on CBC News and Radio Canada throughout the campaign, asked users who they think won based on what they saw, heard, and read. About 32% of participants who watched the debate said they did not know who came out on top. Of those who did pick a winner, Conservative Erin O'Toole came first with 21%, and Liberal Justin Trudeau came second with 18%. The lack of a knockout punch in the English debate one day after the French language debate also failed to produce a clear winner. It's likely to keep the election close in the days leading up to the September 20th vote. None of the leaders were able to leverage the debate to win the hearts and minds of their opponents, said Clifton van der Linden, an assistant professor of political science at McMaster University and chief executive officer of Vox Pop Labs, the organization that runs Vote Compass. According to Vote Compass's results, about 42% said Thursday's debate would not influence their vote, compared to 30% who said it was very likely to inform the way they cast their ballot. Men were more likely than women to say it would not change their mind, 45% compared to 39% of women. Those who indicated they intend to vote for the Green Party were most likely to say the debate would factor into their decision. More than half of those who indicated they plan to support the Bloc Québécois also said the debate would not sway their decision, even after leader Yves-François Blanchette's tense exchange with the moderator over Quebec's Bill 21. Those who went into the debate having chosen a party were more likely to say their preferred leader won the debate. But not all of the leaders enjoyed strong reviews from their supporters. Vote Compass results show NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is seen as the most competent and trustworthy leader overall. 39% of people who intend to vote for NDP say he won the debate. Another 38% of NDP supporters said they did not know who won. According to 66% of those who indicated they plan to support the Conservatives, O'Toole won the night. About 52% of Green supporters said Paul won. About 47% of Liberal supporters said Trudeau won the debate, while another 34% of Liberal supporters said they did not know who won. Van der Linden told O'Toole's perceived success may be buoyed by the fact that his party has climbed in the polls since the election was called. It's often the case that supporters of a party that appears to have momentum in the polls is more satisfied with the performance of the party leader they support, he said in an email. My suspicion is that Liberal and NDP supporters were hoping that their candidates were going to knock it out of the park and spur a major shift in current polling trends. The results probably reflect their disappointment that this doesn't appear to have happened. This was developed by a team of social and statistical scientists from Vox Pop Labs. Vote Compass is a civic engagement application offered in Canada exclusively by CBC/Radio Canada. The findings are based on 2,627 respondents who participated in Vote Compass on September 9th.
Now we go with Humaira with a segment on Truth and Reconciliation Holiday.
The Government of Canada is committed to reconciliation and ensuring that the tragic history and ongoing legacy of the residential schools is never forgotten. As you may be aware, the government recently passed legislation to make September 30th a federal statutory holiday called the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. For all Canadians, this day provides an opportunity to recognize and commemorate the legacy of residential schools. This may present itself as a day of quiet reflection or participation in a community event. Our current collective agreements include provisions to allow for an additional designated holiday if one is proclaimed by an Act of Parliament. As a result, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation will become a designated paid holiday and will allow employees in the federal public service to observe and participate in this important day starting September 2021.
Regent Park residents are calling on all federal candidates seeking to represent Toronto Centre to support and fund a community benefits agreement for Phase 4 and 5 of the development of Regent Park. The Regent Park Coalition has requested a response from all the federal candidates during a time of great urgency to support the community and fund a trilateral community benefits agreement endorsed by Toronto Community Housing Corporation, Tridel, and the Regent Park Neighborhood Association. The federal government is an important partner and funder for an important public and community revitalization project and responsible for investing in community priorities during the midst of a pandemic and economic downturn. Mr. Walid Kogali, who has worked with many residents to call for a community benefits agreement, is deeply concerned with the lack of hard targets for local employment, no financial incentives for home ownership, and no new sustainable funding for important community programming and mentorship. The Regent Park Coalition is working with stakeholders to create long-term opportunities for residents to generate both social and financial wealth in Regent Park.
So we don't want developers to plan how a community was going to be built. We wanted the community to do so. And so what we did is we started that work by setting up a community benefits coalition. A couple of years ago, back in 2018, the idea, 2019 is when we really got started through our meetings and got a lot of milestones accomplished, such as the community benefits framework, which was an agreement with TCC on how community benefits were going to be distributed, right? Which group was going to do that. But what we also did is we did some important work before that. We talked to our neighbors. We found out what our collective priorities were. You know what we heard from our community? Community space. People wanted community-governed space. They wanted space that's after 5 o'clock, there'll be activities for our youth, for our seniors, you know, for folks to get the help. So just that everything shuts off at 5 o'clock. What we also heard was we wanted sustainable funding. We wanted to make sure that programs in our community got funding. We also wanted to make sure that, you know what, we had hard targets. We did not just get false commitments, that we hired people from our communities. So we wanted to make sure that 50% of full-time jobs created, people in our community got those jobs. Apprenticeships. We wanted hard commitments. That's something else that we wanted. The other things that we found that we wanted was we wanted to make sure that the community was not just being consulted, that they were decision makers in this process.
The vast majority of Canadians are against racism and acknowledge it as an issue in Canada, though about 2/3 of all non-white Canadians say they have experienced it themselves, according to a new poll. Those results come just ahead of the 2021 federal election, an election with platforms that, according to some advocates, do not have a strong enough push against anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism, as well as a commitment to police reform in Canada. Sandy Hudson, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Canada, said that the lack of attention coming to these issues in terms of party policies and platforms was not only extremely frustrating, but telling of parties' values. Though most of the major federal parties have included racism and discrimination in several sections of their platform, outlining some call to action to tackle the racial issues, Hudson says what they currently have is not nearly enough or substantive. The NDP's platform included a pledge to confront racism and to ban carding, while a Liberal stated further support for an action plan to fight systemic racism, while the Green Party was noted as having the only platform that had specific promises to reduce the size of police organizations like the RCMP. The Conservatives did not include any promises to tackle systemic or anti-Black racism in their platform, with the party's leader even pledging to hire more police officers in face of calls from advocates to defund and reform policing organizations across the country. It was a point that Fareed Khan of Canadians United Against Hate made during an interview with the Canadian Press on Saturday. Khan, who also pointed to the lack of discussion on racism from Liberal leader Justin Trudeau and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh during their campaign trail, told the press that it had made him wonder how seriously they were taking the issue. On the one platform, when it would make the biggest impact during an election, they haven't talked about it, Khan said. So what that says to me and a lot of people, activists, is that maybe what they've said over the last year is just a lot of talk. And they're not as serious about fighting hate as they said they were. Hudson said that she was not surprised that the issues of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism were being pushed aside from leaders' campaign trails and platforms. The fact that the Black Lives Matter movement still has not been able to penetrate political barriers in Ottawa speaks to a crisis of democracy in Canada, Hudson said. She raised questions on why anti-Black racism or racism policies in general were not a large platform piece in the federal leaders' agendas, despite the massive Black Lives Matter protests last year. How do you have an issue through which so many people take so many actions during a pandemic, going out to demonstrate, and that's not one of your flagship things that you're dealing with, she said. What is it going to take for them to care? It's something that's pretty disgusting to have a system where people put so much energy into saying this is a priority for us, and for all of them to just really gloss over it or ignore it altogether. Meanwhile, the poll done exclusively for Global News by Ipsos found that 96% of all Canadians say that racism is a terrible thing. Just over a quarter of Canadians say they have been a victim of racism personally, though that proportion skyrockets to 65% for Canadians who identify other than white. Darrell Bricker, the CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs, said that there has been a sea change on the issue of racism as a whole throughout Canada. It's no longer a question anymore as to whether or not racism is a problem in this country and whether or not there needs to be change in order to deal with it, Bricker said. But I still recognize, as the people in the surveys do, that there is a significant problem and other people are experiencing it. The polling also revealed distinct differences in gender, age, and region when it came to Canadians' experiences with racism. Younger to middle-aged Canadians were more likely to say they have been a victim of racism in comparison to those aged 55 and older, according to the poll. While men were more likely to say they have experienced racism as opposed to women. Geographically, Canadians west of Quebec were more likely to say they have been a victim of racism, with around 30% accounting in Ontario and Prairie provinces, and almost 1 in 4 of all people in British Columbia. On the other hand, the majority of people in Quebec and Atlantic Canada say they have not been a victim of racism firsthand, with 57% of people in those regions strongly agreeing that they have not experienced racism. In addition, while over 3/4 of Canadians in most parts of the country say they strongly agree that racism is a terrible thing, that sentiment dropped slightly to 67% in Quebec. According to Bricker, Canada's change in attitude to systemic racism comes in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the push of Indigenous reconciliation. The majority of the Canadian population, the strong majority of the Canadian population, believes that this is wrong, and it's something needs to be done about it, Bricker said.
YEY and the City of Toronto is launching a Youth Crisis Care Fund. The fund is available to support youth from Regent Park between the ages of 12 to 29 who are experiencing a crisis. Funding priority will be given to applications that meet the following criteria and guidelines. The application must be completed by a youth worker, agency, or community leader affiliated with an agency or SDP working group. Youth must be from Regent Park or experiencing homelessness in an adjacent community at the time of application. Incident must have occurred within the last 12 months of application. Applicants can receive up to $1,000 per youth per month. Funds are available for transportation, temporary safe housing, pest control supplies, prescription, including medical aid and food.
And that's all for today's show. Once again, my name is Murphy Brown, and Humaira Rahman and Fred delivering local news from our headquarters at Focus Media Arts Center at Regent Park. Thanks for watching and have a great day.
Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And when you do subscribe, hit the little notification bell so you never miss out on any of our content. If you'd also like more, you can find us on our other social media platforms. And if you want even more, you can look at our website.